In the pallid light of the moon, the old town of Alvingham seemed almost serene, a stark contrast to the undercurrent of malaise that had settled over its ancient cobblestone streets. Among its weary residents was Eleanor, a young historian drawn to Alvingham by its obscure past and cryptic legends. The night was brisk, and as she walked through the town's central square, the echoes of her footsteps. Eleanor's curiosity had always been her compass, leading her to the forgotten corners of history. But tonight, it drew her to the derelict clock tower standing at the edge of the square, its face frozen at midnight, as if it had given up on keeping time long ago. The air around it was thick with a chilling mist, and as she approached, a peculiar sensation of déjà vu crept over her, as though this wasn't her first encounter with the ominous structure. The town's history was littered with odd disappearances and tales of unexplainable phenomena, often linked to the time the clock tower stopped. Eleanor, with her fervent interest in the arcane, found these stories magnetic. She had learned that the town was once vibrant, bustling with life until a series of misfortunes shadowed its existence, coinciding eerily with the ceasing of the clock. Inside the tower, the air was musty, filled with the scent of old metal and wood. The ground floor housed a forgotten exhibition of timepieces, each one eerily stopped at midnight. Eleanor's eyes were drawn upward, following the spiral staircase that seemed to ascend into darkness. Compelled by an inexplicable urge, she began to climb, her hand grazing the cold iron banister, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. As she reached the top, the room housed the great clock mechanism, its gears immobile and silent. The moonlight cast strange shadows across the walls, distorting the space in unsettling ways. It was here that Eleanor first felt it, a subtle shift in the air, a thinning of the veil between the now and the then. The clock struck an impossible chime, echoing deeply through the chamber and into her bones. Then, darkness swallowed her whole. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she was outside the tower, the moon still casting its cold light over Alvingham. But something was amiss. The air was denser, the shadows deeper, and the silence more oppressive. The buildings around the square, once merely old and worn, now loomed as if decayed by centuries. The wood of the nearby benches was rotten. Confused and frightened, Eleanor tried to retrace her steps, hoping to find her way back to the familiarity of her rented room above the town's inn. But with each step, the surroundings grew increasingly distorted. The streets seemed to warp and wind in ways that defied her memories of the town's layout. It was as if the very essence of Alvingham was deteriorating around her. The night dragged on, an endless loop of twisted alleyways and crumbling facades. Each time Eleanor thought she found a way out, she would find herself back in front of the clock tower, its face still mocking her with its frozen hands. Panic began to claw at her mind, the isolation of her situation enveloping her in a cloak of despair. Hours or perhaps minutes passed. It was impossible to tell in this distorted version of Alvingham. Eleanor stumbled upon a small, decrepit park, the swings creaking ominously in the wind. A figure appeared on a bench, shrouded in darkness. Heart-pounding, she approached. The figure turned out to be an old woman, her eyes hollow, her skin as pale as the moonlight. "You're not the first," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "The clock, it changes things. It traps you in its ticks and talks, but they're just illusions, dear. Each chime pulls you deeper into its nightmare." Eleanor's fear surged as the old woman vanished before her eyes, leaving behind a cold gust of wind. She ran back to the tower, the center of this looping labyrinth, her mind reeling with terror and confusion. As she burst through the door, the clock struck again, the sound louder, more demanding. With each chime, the environment decayed further. The air grew thick with the stench of mold and rust, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Eleanor, driven by a mix of desperation and determination, climbed the staircase once more, her breaths short and ragged. At the top, the mechanism awaited, more monstrous than before, its gears gnarled and overgrown with some dark, vine-like substance. The room felt alive, watching her, breathing with a sinister rhythm. Eleanor, with nothing left to lose, reached into the heart of the mechanism where the hands of the clock intersected. Her touch unleashed a torrent of visions, flashes of the town's past, each period darker and more distorted than the last. She saw the townspeople of different eras, their faces twisted in fear, their lives looping in endless despair, all enslaved by the clock's will. With a final surge of energy, she wrenched the hands of the clock free, breaking them with a force that came from beyond herself. The mechanism shrieked, a sound not of this world, and the visions dissolved into darkness. Eleanor awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows of her room at the inn. The town of Alvingham buzzed gently outside, its streets no longer twisted by darkness. Tentatively, she walked to the square. The clock tower stood benignly, its face showing the correct time, the air around it clear and free from the oppressive dread of the loops. Though the town had returned to normal, the shadows of what she experienced lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder of the thin lines between times and realities. Eleanor knew she would leave Alvingham soon, but she also knew the clock's nightmare would forever tick away, quietly, in the darkest corners of her memories.